After a turbulent night, having to share a shelter with 3 children I met a few hours earlier, dawn finally broke, the sandstorm over. I don't know if it was worse than the sun we'll have to face now that our resources are almost zero. We have little food and no water. My name is Ethan Voss, and I'm on a journey to find my daughter, who was taken from me 15 years ago. The world is no longer the same. There are barely any humans left, and yet my journey has brought me here, with these 3 children who don't fully trust me yet, haven't even told me their names. At least the girl put away the knife she'd been pointing at me a few hours ago. The thin boy rubbed his eyelids red, unable to sleep. The other boy, the smaller one, gripped the blanket with both fists as if holding on to an edge to keep from falling. Outside the shelter, a trail cuts through the sand like a fresh scar, 2 deep parallel lines, a jagged furrow winding between them. The morning wind tries to lick the edges to erase the design, but it's still early. Last night's storm left the desert as smooth as glass, and new marks shine like open wounds. I stand there, staring, my throat scratching as if I've swallowed sandpaper. The smell is the same as always: hot dust, old metal, a promise of rust on my tongue, and beneath it all, the drive that has kept me going for years. More than a decade of steps in the same direction whenever I find any clue that might lead me to my daughter. Behind me, 3 children watch me with the wary patience of those who learned early on that every adult is a calculated risk. The tension I felt yesterday has dissolved a little, not out of trust, but out of a simple understanding. I haven't come to hurt them. But that doesn't mean I'm welcome, just tolerated. The thin boy with eyes that measure distances and consequences monitors my movements, as if mentally noting my speed, my breath, the routes I can take to escape or attack. The other boy, the smaller one, too small for this world, rests his forehead on his forearm and breathes through his mouth, trying to stave off thirst. The night has robbed us all of our strength.
I could go on alone. The thought passes through me like a shadow that passes and disappears. It would be faster, quieter, less heavy. I know my own rules. Follow the edge of the trail so as not to erase it. Use the crests of the dunes to avoid sinking. Avoid the concrete foundations where the sound thickens and betrays. I could, but their image would come back to me like a stone in my chest. And I don't carry stones. I carry promises. And promises don't go with abandoning children in the middle of nowhere. Staying here will kill us, I say, without raising my voice. The air from the makeshift shelter still escapes through the pipes, whispers thin notes against the metal, and disappears. Not today, maybe, but soon. You know that. The girl stares at me. There's no fear, no sympathy. It's a clean, practical coldness, the kind that saves someone's life at 11. In her eyes, I'm not a monster or a savior. I'm a variable, something that can help or fail, and therefore something that doesn't deserve attachment. No one clings to a rope that could snap at any moment. What if we choose to stay? The thin man asks, not out of defiance, but out of method. He wants to test the structure of my argument, like slowly pulling on a table leg to see if it wobbles. So you're choosing to wait for thirst, or for people worse than me? He glances at the girl, searching for a sign of agreement. She doesn't give one. She keeps her face straight, a statue of breathing dust. The younger boy moves his lips, but no sound comes out. The night has left him feverish. The morning heat only makes it worse. I take 2 steps, bring my body closer to the trail, and point with my chin toward the horizon. Someone passed through here carrying a load. The vehicle isn't light, nor is it too heavy.
This means whoever is driving it knows what they're doing. They avoided the deepest lines, climbed safely where the sand swallows the unwary. They're not amateurs. "So what?" the girl asks. Cold. The word falls dry to the ground. "Well, where people like this pass, there are usually more people. And where there are people, there are things. Water, food, medicine. Maybe enemies, but also the possibility of not dying standing still." She straightens her shoulders, discreetly, as if redistributing the weight of her own courage. It's not agreement. It's simply an internal reorganization to endure the morning. "You sound like you have an obligation to take us," she says. "I speak as someone who won't be able to walk knowing they've left you behind," I reply, and let the silence do the rest. Too many explanations sound like excuses, and I don't apologize for choosing to carry more than I should. Not in this world. The thin boy approaches, crouches near the trail, sinks 2 fingers into the sand and feels the compaction. "It passed recently," he concludes. "The wind hasn't erased the edges yet. It could be hours." I nod. "Hours, tops. If we continue now, we might find more tracks before the sun eats them away." "What if it's a trap?" he asks, insistent, correct. "People who point out clues to gather curious people." "Then let's not go through the middle," I say. "Let's flank. The ridges give vision, and sound carries against the wind. If anyone hears us, we'll hear them first." The girl lets out an almost imperceptible sigh, the kind of sound that doesn't reveal fatigue. It reveals determination. She looks at the smaller boy, who is now trembling slightly. The blade in her hand lowers a centimeter. "He can't last much longer," she says, without drama. "So, it's now, or it's never." I don't know if it's the sentence, the weight of the morning, or the way the younger boy tries to hide his trembling with his chin pressed to his chest, but something is decided there.
The girl tucks the knife into the waistband of her pants, steps to the side of the trail, and watches me as if giving up a spot in line, not as if accepting a guide. The thin boy adjusts the strap of his backpack, checking with his fingers an invisible map drawn from memory. The younger boy just looks at me and waits for me to tell him where. "Let's go along the edge," I say. "I'll go first. You," I point my chin at the thin man, "stay 3 steps away from me, a little higher up on the ridge so you can see. You," I look at the girl, "bring the little one between you two. I'll clear the way. If anyone comes, I'll see them first." "What if you fall?" she says quickly. "Then it's up to you," I reply, looking straight at her, "just like you're deciding now." She holds my gaze for a second longer than she did yesterday. A second longer is a long time for someone like her. She gives a curt nod. "Come on." We set off. The desert here has the texture of ground glass, a thin layer that crackles beneath our boots and rises in sweet dust at the bottom of the gorge. There are no long shadows. The sun hasn't yet risen high enough to create relief on the ground. I walk, measuring the angle of the dunes with my legs, my pulse adjusting my breathing rhythm so as not to waste air. The trail leads to the concrete columns I've seen in the distance, the skeleton of an elevated highway, some pillars still standing, others fallen like ancient trunks. It's been a long time since I passed through a small town. Almost all of them have collapsed in on themselves like tired houses. Every 20 steps, I look back. They're coming. The girl holds the smaller one's shoulder with her open hand, leading without tenderness, but without brutality. The thin one watches the sides. He has a good instinct for high points, for shadows that deceive. Somewhere in my chest, the silver oyster hits the bone with each step, a metronome insistent that says, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." "You walk like you've done this 1,000 times, the thin man comments, too out of breath for a long conversation. "I already did, and I almost died 1,001 times. He doesn't smile. He just keeps the information where he keeps everything.
We reach the first large piece of concrete, a fallen slab that breaks the wind and creates a thin shadow. I signal with my hand. Pause. Everyone stops. The girl crouches the smaller one on the ground and presses her forehead against his for a second, as if touching two stones to see if one will spark. He closes his eyes. The tremor has subsided, the fever hasn't. A sigh escapes me unintentionally. Guilt always finds ways to slip through the cracks in the armor. "What are you looking for?" the girl asks, seeing me examining the sand with excessive care. "Pattern change," I say. A step that suddenly deepens, a mark that deviates for no reason. People who are afraid step differently. People who know they're being followed step better. "And what do you see?" she insists. "I see haste," I reply, pointing to where the trail deepens as it climbs the dune. In someone accustomed to haste. It's not a disorderly escape, it's routine. "What routine?" the thin man asks. "To fetch," I say. The word comes out before I can even cover it with anything, and it stays there naked. Fetch. Children, supplies, parts, people. The new world has few routines. The worst are always the most organized. The sun lifts its chin in the sky and pours out heat. The sand begins to heat up from below, and the air ripples behind the concrete slabs as if the world breathes through its mouth. I feel the sweat begin to form and evaporate in the same instant, a futile cycle. Thirst envelops each of us like a tight shirt. The girl notices my gaze and shrugs as if to say, "I already felt that yesterday." The thin man wets his lips with his tongue and doesn't lose focus. The shorter one holds his stomach, a small hand trying to embrace a vast void. "There," the thin man points, and I follow his finger. The landscape changes. On the horizon, silhouetted by the glow, a small town reveals its silhouette. Power lines without wires, broken roofs, a water tower bent like a tired neck. I don't know if anyone lives there.
I know any place like that holds as much danger as resources. "Will there be people?" the youngest asks, his voice stuck in a well. "There will be something," I reply. "I won't promise more than that. Anyone who promises too much out here is lying." The girl doesn't move. She measures the distance to the city as if calculating whether her body can handle it. Her eyes weigh me down again. She doesn't sympathize with me, doesn't care how I feel, doesn't care if I'll fall before or after the next dune. And yet, she waits for me to say, "Let's go." Not out of respect, out of strategy. If I'm in front, the first bullet will come from me. "The shadow over there before the first building," I say, pointing to a broken awning. "When we get there, we'll stop. I'll go in first. You wait in the corner." No one speaks loudly. If we hear footsteps, duck. If you see light, don't run toward it. "Are you in charge now?" she asks coldly. "I'm not in charge," I reply. "I want to get out alive, and I want you to get out alive too. If there's a better way, tell me. I'll follow." She opens her mouth, closes it, and shakes her head slightly. It's not agreement. It's pragmatism. We move on. It seems the further we walk, the more I feel the city is further away than we anticipated. The desert has this cruel way. The closer you get to shelter, the more your body decides to take its toll. The smallest stumbles, once, twice, and I prepare to catch him before he falls. The city grows slowly, like a timid animal. Lampposts with illegible signs, scratched facades, and old graffiti that the sand has tried to eat away. "Hold on a little longer to the younger one," I say, without touching him yet. I know when to hold on and when to just say it. It won't be long. There's always not much left for those who are hungry and thirsty. But this time, in fact, there is a little left. The girl isn't as tense anymore, but she remains cool. She won't throw herself in front of anything for me. If I fall, she'll take responsibility. If I get back up, she considers the cost to the group. No more, no less. And strangely, this clarity gives me peace. In a world driven by impulse and desperation, coolness is sometimes honesty.
I think of everything that could go wrong before the sun sets. I think of everything I need to make right before night overtakes us. By the end of the day, I know something will break. A plan, a body, a certainty. I just don't know which. And that's why I keep going. Because sometimes what breaks is the right door. By the end of this day, I murmur, more to myself than to them, we'll have answers. Or more questions. And if that's the case, I'll carry the questions on my shoulders. As always. The desert lies behind us, and I choose, once again, the burden of not abandoning them. Because if I follow these trails alone and find nothing, I'll die of thirst. But if I go on without them and find something, I'll die inside. And death inside is slower, worse. One step at a time. The day is just beginning. The rest, I'll figure it out and endure. As always.
The sun was unforgiving. Each step felt like carrying the weight of an entire body on my back, even with nothing but a light, nearly empty backpack. The sand reflected the heat, blinding, burning the skin on my ankles. We walked in silence, not by choice, but because the dry air stole every word from my throat. The city was already visible on the horizon, a broken silhouette of low-rise buildings and twisted structures, like the bones of a long-dead creature. To anyone else, it might have been just abandoned ruins. To us, it was hope, or a trap. The thinner boy, who always seemed to calculate each step, kept his eyes half closed, assessing the path. Sometimes, he glanced at the shadows dancing in the sand, as if sensing dangers I couldn't see. The girl, however, decided to walk a few steps ahead, firmly, without slowing down, as if pride were enough fuel. The smaller boy, however, was the one who suffered the most. I noticed his knees buckling, his feet dragging faint grooves in the sand. His breathing was shallow, ragged, like someone struggling to draw air into lungs that no longer obey. "Hey," I murmured, moving closer. "You need to stop for a bit." He tried to deny it, shaking his head stubbornly, but his body wouldn't budge. He fell to his knees, bracing his hands on the hot sand. "Luke!" the girl screamed, and it was the first time I heard his name come out of her mouth.
I ran to him, crouching down to grab his shoulders. His skin was burning, the sweat long gone, replaced by a dangerous dryness, dehydration. "He can't go on like this," the thin boy said, looking around nervously. "If we don't get water quickly—" "I know," I said, harsher than I intended. Helplessness was eating away at me. The girl knelt beside her brother, running her hand through his dirty, dusty hair, her gesture almost desperate. She was still cold to me, but now there was no hardness in her eyes. There was fear. "Is he going to die?" he asked, his voice breaking. I swallowed, my own mouth cracking. I was on edge too, but there was no room for weakness. "No," I replied firmly, even though I wasn't sure. "I'll carry him." I shifted Luke onto my back, wrapping his legs around my waist. The weight felt twice as heavy as it actually was, because my own strength was drained. Every step became a struggle, but there was no choice. The girl stood beside me, almost guiding me, while the other boy walked a little ahead, alert, as if trying to clear a path against invisible enemies. The city approached slowly, each crumbling building growing like a ghost against the cruel white sky. Sweat burned my eyes, my heart hammered in my ribs, my legs screamed for strength, but I strained every muscle as if it were my last. When we finally reached the edge of town, my strength gave out. My knees hit the ground, my vision blurred, and I felt Luke slide off my back. I tried to resist, but my body betrayed me. I collapsed onto my side, feeling the rough sand stick to my face. The last thing I saw was the girl trying to lift me by the shoulders and the thin boy looking around, scared, before the darkness swallowed me.
Fainting is like sinking into a sea that no longer exists. First comes the heaviness, then the darkness, and then a distant sound, a bell miles away, urging me to rise. When I come back, it's not all at once. I return in pieces. First the smell, hot dust, rust, a residue of old oil, then the sound, the wind biting through metal plates, a creak of wood, hurried footsteps, and finally my body, heavy, aching all over, my mouth a desert within a desert. "Get up, old man," a voice whispers, and the word old man isn't an insult, it's a rope. Small hands reach under my armpits. Let's get him out of the sun. I feel my arm slip over a shoulder that can barely support its own weight. Another arm pulls on my backpack, misaligning the straps, scraping my burned shoulder. The world spins. A marquee appears and disappears. The cracked floor greets me harshly. The concrete is warm, but less so than the sand. Shade. Mediocre relief, but sufficient. Here, the girl's voice, close to my ear. Cold, but less sharp than yesterday. Don't die now. I don't answer. The body can only obey one command at a time. Breathe. A spark of lucidity makes me put my hand to my chest. The oyster pendant hits my sternum, intact. It's not protection. It's a keepsake. And souvenirs sometimes save more than water. I open my eyes. The marquee is a rectangle of shadow drawn by an old structure, half iron, half promise of collapse. Ahead, the street, broken facades, shattered storefronts, a toppled metal bench. The wind pushes a torn sign against a pole, a printed smile of someone who sold something that no longer exists.
The silence here has echoes, sounds that vanished without warning. "I'm here, okay?" Another voice, small, trembling. "Luke." I know his name now because she screamed it just now when he fell. "I'm okay." I turn my face with effort. Luke sits with his back against a peeling wall, his knees together, his hands clutching the dirty fabric of a blanket. His eyes are dark in the middle of his dry face. He tries to smile at me, but the smile lacks the saliva to peel from the corners of his mouth. The girl adjusts my legs, placing a thin cloth under my neck. A dry gesture, without tenderness but useful. The thin boy crouches down and examines the street, the corners, the doorways, like an animal that has learned to be a sentinel. "We can't just stand there and wait," he says, his voice unwavering. "If there are people here, they've already seen us." I heard movement to the north, on the back block. A creaking sound, metal on metal. It could just be the wind. They speak softly, but the sound reaches me clearly. The body may be at its limit, but the ears of those who survive learn to stretch. "I'll take him," Luke says, looking very serious for his small size. "You guys, you can go." "No," the girl replies instantly. "You almost fell again." "I'll stay close by," the skinny boy suggests. "We'll split up by block. In and out. We'll bring whatever we can, quickly."
He turns to me.
for the first time treating me like someone he can authorize. I open my mouth, but my tongue feels like a stone. I force a word out. Slowly. He understands more than I say. He understands everything I can't say. Don't make noise. Don't spread too far apart. Turn back at the slightest sign. Listen to the wind before you hear your feet. He nods, a curt gesture. Ellen, the thin man calls, not realizing he'd just given me her name. We'll get water first, then anything that works as medicine. Ellen. The name falls into me like a needle through thick cloth, piercing through. Names shape people. Until then, she was the girl. Now she's Ellen, someone who holds a knife without trembling, who pushes my shoulder into the shadows and says, "Don't die now," as if ordering the world to do the bare minimum. Theodore, she calls back impatiently, and now I have his name too. The pharmacy is on the corner of the Crooked Tower. I saw the chalice symbol on the sign, faded but recognizable. Theodore nods. He looks at me again. If anyone comes, 3 knocks on the wall. 2 beats is wind, Ellen adds. 3 is people. I take a deep breath and try to sit up. My body protests, pain embedded in my muscles, a network of barbs. My head spins.
I sit anyway, leaning my shoulders against the wall, feeling the accumulated heat seep into me. If you hear voices, don't answer, I say, my harsh voice cutting through the thin air. And don't call for me. Ellen stares at me for a second, still cold, still distant. But she doesn't contradict me. We'll be back, she says, as if she's dealing with logistics, not affection. They disappear down the street, light. Childlike steps learn to become adult steps. Luke and I remain in the cocoon of shadow, surrounded by light. The wind folds a corner of rusted paper, then unfolds it, playing with time as if nothing mattered. She always talks like that, Luke comments softly, his voice raspy. Harsh, but she's not bad. I know. Harshness is not evil. He thinks of it like trying a new food. So you're not bad either, he concludes half to himself. Just tough. I laugh, a dry noise that hurts my throat. Maybe. Time stretches. I close my eyes for a moment and listen to the city inside. A distant tinkle, the soft rattle of a window, the scrape of something small. Somewhere, drops fall. Or is it just the memory of the sound of water hitting metal? I remember an old tank in my father's backyard, the sound of the hose filling, and my brother Levi complaining that I wasted it playing windmills. Water isn't a toy, Ethan, he'd say in that voice of someone who always knew too much. I swallow his name back where I keep the things I still can't face. You have a daughter, Luke says, as if he's telling me a secret of his own. You said that when you fell. I open my eyes. I don't remember speaking. Maybe I speak even when I don't want to.
I do, I reply. Her name is Sophie. He repeats the name, slowly, as if savoring a good word. Sophie. She wanted to see the sea, I continue, without planning, when she was little. Luke leans his head against the wall, too. I've never seen the sea, he says, and behind the phrase lies a question that dares not be born. Does it still exist? It does, I reply, with a conviction I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it comes from the pendant touching the bone, a tiny piece of oyster that tells me some blue still breathes somewhere. And it has the most beautiful sound there is. He smiles, a tired smile that shows no teeth. It must be better than the wind. I let the silence grow again, unhurriedly. My body cries out for water, as if asking for forgiveness. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. My head throbs in time with my pendant. The shadow moves slowly before us, the marquee depicting the passage of time. "If they take too long," Luke begins, and falls silent. "They won't take any longer than they have to," I say. Ellen knows how to count minutes, and Theodore knows how to cut corners. "You know our names now," he observes, with a small pride that almost hides itself. "I heard you call yourselves. Names are important." He nods, as if validating a rule he's always known. A time passes when only the wind speaks. Then a sound. 3 sharp knocks up ahead. Luke and I look at each other. Seconds later, 2 short knocks. Their code. Wind. A moment later, nothing. "They'll be back," I say, more to calm my body than him.
Luke plays with his shoelace, his slender fingers fidgeting. "Do you think you'll find her?" he asks, and the question hits me without warning, without cushioning. I've answered this 1,000 times to myself, never out loud to anyone other than the wind. "I think," I say, letting the word hang between us, "and if I don't, I'll die trying." Luke absorbs the weight of it like someone pressing their ear to a track, listening for a train that might never come. "I wish someone would die trying for me," he whispers, so low it barely carries. I turn my face to him. The sun outside paints a halo around his dirty hair. He's not asking for anything. He's just telling the world as it is. "I won't abandon you," I say. And it's not an empty promise. It's a threat to the desert. Another sound. Metal scraping against metal a few buildings away. Luke flinches. I raise my hand. Silence. I hold my breath and let my ears wander. A step. Another. Pause. A voice. No? A distant, dry bark, like an animal cough. Then, nothing. "Dog," Luke says in a whisper. Maybe just the wind playing. But the body prepares itself, involuntarily. The muscles tighten. The chest tightens. Ellen and Theodore head toward the crooked water tower and the chalice plaque. The city is a board with broken pieces, and I sit on a middle square, unable to move my legs. More time passes, and the shadow swallows us a little more. I blink slowly to preserve the little moisture left in my eyes. My heart seems larger than it should, taking up too much space inside my body. In a crack in the floor, an ant drags a crumb from somewhere I don't know. I think about that creature's absurd stubbornness and laugh inwardly at the absurdity of comparing my stubbornness to hers. "Are you going to sleep?" Luke asks, worried. "No," I lie. "I'm just going to listen." Listening is the oldest form of prayer I know. I close my eyes and let the sounds wash over me like waves on stone. In the background, a ringing of metal, the patient roar of the wind, the dragging of something heavy, and then running footsteps, 2 pairs, quick, approaching. I open my eyes just as 2 shadows enter our shadow. Ellen arrives first, her chest rising and falling rapidly, but her face still stone. Theodore follows close behind, carrying a backpack that wasn't ours, inflated with hope. My heart leaps so fast that I nearly fall again.
For the first time since morning, I smell the water before I see it. It's impossible, but I do. "We found it," Theodore says shortly, efficiently. "Water, a little. Medicine, even less." "And?" I ask, my voice raw in my throat. Ellen opens her backpack, takes out a small bottle of pills, a crushed bottle half full, and 2 cans of something that has survived the test of time. The sheen of water inside is almost indecent. She stares at me, and for a second, I think she's going to drink first. She doesn't. He holds the bottle out to Luke. First him, he says. 2 caps, no more. Luke obeys like someone who has attended a ceremony. He drinks a capful, coughs, drinks a second, closes his eyes. When he opens them, the glow returns a millimeter. Then Ellen hands me the bottle, and I drink half a capful, enough for my tongue to remember it's a tongue and not a stone. I pass it to Theodore, who wets his mouth and hands it back without greed. They learned the sacredness of scarcity early. Pharmacy? I ask. Broken, Theodore replies. But there was a fallen shelf. I grabbed what I could. Painkillers, a dried-out vial of serum. Nothing that will cure us, but something that will get us through until tomorrow. What about us? I venture. Did you see anyone? Ellen and Theodore exchange a look that I can't quite read. Ellen responds, enough to know we're not alone. The phrase hangs between us like illuminated dust. It's not good news, nor bad. It's just the rule that never changes. Where there are things, there are people. Where there are people, there are problems. We rest for 15 minutes. Then we look for a more enclosed space. Here, every corner is a window. Ellen tucks the knife back into her waistband, sits cross-legged, but her body doesn't relax. Theodore arranges the medicines in an order only he understands, checking faded labels, sniffing, shaking. Luke rests his head on my arm and closes his eyes for 2 seconds that feel like a gift. I breathe. The world hasn't gotten lighter. It's only become, for a moment, bearable. In my throat, a grain of sand insists on being remembered. In my chest, the oyster necklace I found rests against the bone in a rhythm that repeats, now, now, now. And for a rare moment, I believe we'll have the strength to get through the afternoon, then the night, then whatever comes.
I look at the 3 of them. They're not mine. They won't be. But as long as they breathe under the same shade as me, the bill is mine. The desert knows how to charge, I know how to pay. And for now, we pay with 15 minutes of calm. Then, with steps. Then, with decisions that will cost us dearly. Eat, I say, and open a can with the tip of my pocket knife. The smell of something once truly eaten passes through me like a memory. I share. No one complains about the other's share. No one thanks them. Gratitude here is about surviving together. Outside, a distant bark cuts through the air again. No one comments. We just chew slowly, as if each bite were a choice. 15 minutes. Then we move the board. And I, sitting in the shadows, begin to feel like I've come back from my fainting spell. Coming back in one piece is hard, but it's what I know how to do, and I'll keep doing it until the trail I'm following takes me where I need to go, or until the desert swallows me whole. I don't remember exactly when my legs gave out. I only know that the world seemed to spin around me, as if the horizon had collapsed in one fell swoop. One moment I was still walking, carrying Luke on my back with all my remaining strength, and the next I was on my knees, feeling the weight of his small body slide, almost slipping off my shoulders. The heat, thirst, and exertion took their toll, which had been silently building since we left the shelter. The sand and stone ground heaved up until it swallowed me, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, there was no sun burning my skin, no dust biting my lips, only shade. I lay under a makeshift shelter of twisted iron and scraps of canvas that looked like the remains of some collapsed roof. The air inside was stifling, but at least it didn't burn me like it did outside. My throat, however, was a burning wound. Every breath felt like it was tearing. The dizziness returned, and I could only support myself with my elbows on the floor. Ellen turned her face toward me, and for a second our eyes met. There was no hostility,
nor compassion, just a kind of cold assessment. "You passed out on the way," she said. "We had to drag you here." My lips moved with difficulty. "And how did you find water?" Theodore replied without taking his attention off the deserted street. "We didn't really find any, just scraps. A bottle left inside a car, almost dry, enough for a sip each, and for him." He pointed at Luke. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of guilt build. I was the adult, the responsible one, but I was just as broken as they were. Ellen didn't miss the chance to say softly, "If you can't handle it, we'll have to go on without you." Those words cut deeper than thirst. I could see in her eyes that it wasn't a threat, but rather the coldness of someone who learned too early not to depend on anyone. The memory of Sophie struck me like a blade, the age she would be now, the face I might no longer recognize. And suddenly, Ellen seemed like a distant shadow of that daughter I'd lost. I forced my hoarse voice. "I'm going to get up. It's not over yet." But before he could try, Theodore made a sudden gesture, raising his hand. "Shh! Did you hear that?" Silence engulfed us. The sound came next. Footsteps. They weren't human. It was a quick, light rhythm, interspersed with low growls that made my skin crawl. A dog. Wild, probably. Hungry. My heart raced in my chest, but my strength wouldn't respond. I saw Ellen grip the hilt of the knife she hadn't shown since the shelter. Theodore shrank to get a better look through the crack. The growl grew louder, echoing against the destroyed walls of the street. Within seconds, the creature's shadow came running, its fur bristling, its teeth bared.
"Stay back!" Ellen shouted, stepping forward. The animal charged with the ferocity of someone who no longer distinguishes fear from desperation. Ellen tried to strike, but her strength was insufficient to stop the beast's weight. The impact threw her into a pile of rubble. The knife slipped from her hand and fell spinning to the ground. The dog didn't stop. It turned on Theodore, who tried to grab the stick, but the impact was brutal. The boy fell, and the howl, mixed with his scream, was like thunder crashing inside the roof. I dragged myself across the ground, every muscle begging to give up. Luke coughed beside me, and the sight of the helpless child set me ablaze again. With my last bit of strength, I grabbed a loose rock and threw it at the animal. The crack hit the side of its head, making it recoil only for a moment. Ellen took advantage of the opportunity to lunge for the fallen knife, but it was too late for Theodore. The dog had sunk its teeth into him. Blood was flowing fast, and his scream was becoming a whisper. Ellen plunged the blade into the creature's side, once, twice, until the animal limping back before finally collapsing. The silence that followed was suffocating. I crawled toward Theodore, but I could already tell from his glazed look that there was nothing more I could do. Ellen stood, her chest heaving, the knife still dirty in her hands. Her eyes, for the first time, weren't cold. They were filled with fury and unshed tears. She turned to me, and her voice came out as a broken whisper. "He was all I had to rely on out here. And now..." The emptiness in her words echoed within me. I knew what it was like to lose everything, and now Ellen knew it again. Outside, the wind stirred dust over the dead city, but inside that small shelter, the silence was the weight of an irreparable loss. Theodore's body lay motionless before us, and the city around us seemed to have stopped as well, as if even the wind had receded under the weight of the scene. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was something alive, dense, filling the lungs and suffocating. Ellen stood, the knife still in her hand, her knuckles white from clenching. Her eyes were fixed on Theodore, but no tears were falling, only that hard gaze,
which now failed to hide the pain that insisted on escaping through the cracks in her cold mask. Luke, leaning against the twisted iron wall, watched in shock. His shallow breathing turned into silent sobs. He didn't have the strength to cry out loud, but each breath was a wail. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out. Dizziness still gripped me. I placed my hand on the ground, sliding down until I reached the boy's body. That boy had been a pillar during the short journey we'd shared, always trying to think a few steps ahead, always trying to maintain logic amidst the chaos. Now he was there, reduced to a painful absence. "We can't stay here," I murmured, my voice hoarse and broken. "The smell of blood will attract other animals." Ellen gave me a sharp look, as if my words were an affront. "We're not going to leave him lying here like he's nothing," she retorted, her voice thick with anger that hid desperation. The weight of what she said fell upon me. I knew she was right. Theodore couldn't simply be abandoned, but I also knew that if we stayed too long, we risked all ending up in the same situation. The dilemma consumed me. I crawled closer to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I promise, we'll give him a decent place, but not here, not now. First we need to find water, food, survive. If we stay, his sacrifice will mean nothing." Ellen took a deep breath, the blade still trembling in her hand. She turned her face away, biting her lower lip so hard it nearly bled. For a moment, I thought she was going to attack me for suggesting such a thing, but instead, she knelt beside Theodore and placed her hand on his chest. "I will remember what you did for us," he murmured in a thin, barely audible voice. Silence fell again, and only after a few minutes did she stand up. There were no tears on her face, but the change was there. Her gaze now carried a greater weight, a silent fury against the world. Luke coughed, drawing our attention. The boy looked even more frail, his face pale, his lips cracked. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew he'd lost someone. His innocence was fading too quickly. He won't wake up, will he?" he asked, his voice almost too childish for the setting. Ellen took a deep breath and replied without looking at her younger brother. "No, Luke, he won't." The little boy lowered his head and hugged his knees. There were no more questions. With effort, I grabbed a piece of metal to pull myself up. My legs were shaking, but I knew I couldn't fall again. I looked at Ellen. "We need to get out of here before sunset. The city is just ahead. Maybe we can find better shelter and something to keep Luke alive." She took a moment to answer, but finally nodded. First, however, she bent down and pulled a piece of canvas that was draped over us. Carefully, she covered Theodore's body, as if that simple gesture were the only tribute she could offer.
"He'll stay here," he said firmly. "Not like a discarded body, but like someone who resisted until the end." I didn't argue. I just respected her silent ritual. We stumbled out of the penthouse. The sun burned like liquid fire, but the city before us seemed both threatening and promising. Narrow streets, crumbling houses, rusted signs swaying in the wind. The kind of place that could hide both salvation and death. I carried Luke in my arms, his frail body feeling as heavy as lead. Ellen walked beside me, firm but silent. There was no more arguing, just shuffling footsteps toward the unknown. The city seemed deserted, but there was something wrong with that silence. The kind of stillness that came not from abandonment, but from waiting. Each step we took kicked up small clouds of dust, and the sound of my boots against the cracked asphalt was too loud, almost a betrayal of our presence. I carried Luke in my arms, feeling his shallow breaths against my shoulder, while Ellen walked ahead, knife still firmly in hand, her eyes scanning every shadow.
The first buildings were nothing more than shells of concrete and rotting wood. But there were details that didn't match the passage of time. A poorly closed door that creaked still on its hinges, a window with improvised pieces of cloth as curtains, and even a plastic chair lying on its side in the middle of the street as if someone had just left. "Ethan," Ellen called softly, without turning her head. "Look." I followed her gaze to a dark puddle near the curb. I knelt carefully, setting Luke down for a moment, and touched the edge. It was still damp. It wasn't water. It was oil, probably from a vehicle. Fresh. My stomach churned. The tracks we'd seen this morning weren't just memories. They'd reached all the way here. "We're not alone," I murmured. Ellen didn't answer, but her entire body tensed. She tightened her grip on the knife and moved closer to Luke, gently pulling him close. It was curious how, despite her coldness, her protective instincts would surface in moments like these. We continued moving forward. The streets narrowed and the buildings grew taller, creating dark alleys that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The air there was different, heavy with fine dust, but also with something else, a distant smell of smoke, too subtle to be coincidental. "Someone made a fire recently," I thought aloud. Ellen looked around and whispered, almost as if she feared being overheard, "Or it's still lit." Holding Luke again, we walked down a side street. It was then that I noticed another detail that sent a chill down my spine. A rope swinging gently from the top of a pole, still attached to a metal beam. At the end hung a piece of dried meat, perhaps from some animal. It was a wild dog trap, still fresh. Someone was hunting there. My heart raced. It wasn't just the fear of encountering other survivors. It was the fear of what kind of survivors we might encounter. After years in this world, I've learned that when humanity fades, what's left isn't always better than the animals we so feared. It was at that moment that we heard the first clear sound, the metallic thud of something falling inside one of the houses ahead. Ellen stiffened, raising the knife. Luke shuddered in my arms. I froze, trying to decipher whether it was an accident or a trap. "Do we stay or run?" Ellen whispered, not taking her eyes off the house. I didn't have time to respond. A second sound echoed, this time more distant, in another direction, then another, even further away, as if someone, or something, was testing our movement, pushing objects to see if we would react. I slowly bent down and pressed Luke against the nearest wall, placing my finger on his lips to silence him. He nodded, his eyes wide. Then I turned to Ellen. "It's no accident," I murmured. "They're watching us." She clenched her jaw and replied firmly, "Then let them appear." But they didn't show up. They just left the silence again, long enough for the tension to build until it became unbearable.
We walked a few more meters until we reached a central square. In the middle of it was a broken fountain, the statues corroded by time. But at the fountain's dry bottom, something unexpected. A metal bucket, still gleaming in the light, with a few drops of water inside. It was impossible it had been there for so long. Not in this world where every drop was fought over like gold. Ellen looked at me suspiciously. "This is bait." I nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's also the only water we've seen in days." We stood in silence for a moment, weighing the risk against the necessity. The wind blew past, stirring up dust and making the shards of glass around us tinkle like broken bells. And it was then that I noticed something in the distance, in the shadow of a ruined building, a silhouette. Quick, almost imperceptible, watching. I had no doubt. We were being hunted. And yet, the thirst burned inside me, inside Ellen,
and especially inside Luke. The trap was set, and we needed to decide whether we would be easy prey or turn the tables. "Ellen," I said quietly, keeping my eyes fixed on the distant shadow, "if I go, you protect Luke." She turned sharply to face me, her eyes flashing with anger. "You'll die if you touch that bucket. That's what they want." I took a deep breath, my throat feeling as dry as sand. The truth was cruel. We couldn't survive without that water, but getting it could cost us everything. And somewhere between that silence and that shadow, I had the feeling that someone was smiling at our indecision. Every corner seemed to be watching, every broken window a watchful eye. The silence was so profound that even the distant banging of a loose sheet of metal in the wind sounded like thunder. I knew Ellen was thinking the same thing. We weren't alone. The city had ghosts, living or dead, and soon we would find out which ones they were. Deep down, a question gnawed at me as we walked. Theodore had fallen, and yet the road kept calling us. How much further would this path exact?
The bucket seemed to glow brighter with every second it took me to decide. The sunlight reflected off the metal rim, transforming those few drops into something almost sacred. Luke's dry mouth cracked as he swallowed, and it hurt more than any cut. Ellen, her fists clenched, stood her ground, but I could see how thirst was eating away at her too. I took a deep breath and crouched down beside them, keeping my voice low. They want us to go there running. They want it to be quick, desperate. Ellen replied through gritted teeth. And they are not wrong. I looked at her. But if we go as they expect, we'll be dead. Silence fell between us, broken only by the whistling of the wind cutting through the ruins. Then Luke finally spoke, in a low but firm tone that surprised me. "What if we reverse it?" "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. He pointed to the square with his chin, as if calculating invisible distances. "The bucket is the bait. If we pretend to fall for it, they'll show us where they are. But we need a distraction and someone ready on the other side." Ellen turned to face the boy, her gaze a mixture of pride and despair. "So," I continued, "we need to create a false move. I can lure them in, and you two can hide. If anyone shows up, we can try to surprise them." Ellen approached me, her face pressed against mine, her eyes blazing. "If you die, what happens to us?" I took a deep breath, without looking away. "If I don't try, we all die." She held the knife as if to cut me for saying that, but she said nothing. She just walked away, breathing heavily. Her silence was the permission I needed. Luke then leaned in, whispering as if he were older than he was. "I can help. I can throw a rock into the bucket from afar, make it look like someone went to get it. They'll react." I looked at him, assessing. The courage in his gaze wasn't naive, but it wasn't free from fear either. It was the kind of courage born when you've lost so much that taking risks seems natural. I knew that look well. "Okay," I agreed. "But you and Ellen stay together. If anything happens, run. Got it?" Ellen glared at me, but nodded. We positioned ourselves. Ellen and Luke moved behind a low stone wall, where they could observe without being seen. I, on the other hand, advanced slowly halfway across the square, keeping my hands visible, as if truly giving in to the trap. Each step made my heart race, and the feeling of being targeted was almost palpable. Suddenly, clang, a stone hit the metal rim of the bucket, making a shrill sound. The echo reverberated through the square, and immediately something moved in the shadows. I saw the metallic glint of a gun barrel too quickly to be doubted. Instinctively, I threw myself to the side, rolling across the rough floor. The shot came immediately after, dry, echoing off the shattered walls. The projectile ricocheted near me, sending up splinters of concrete. Muffled screams echoed from somewhere higher up, and I realized there were at least two, maybe three. They were positioned on the surrounding buildings like hunters in their nests. "Now!" I yelled to Ellen and Luke. While they took cover, I seized the moment of revelation to run to the side of a building. More shots came, but without accuracy. I was no longer an easy target. I leaned my back against the cold wall and took a deep breath. The bucket was still there, untouched in the middle of the square, still glistening like temptation. But now I knew. The water wasn't just bait. It was also the key. They wanted us desperate, and perhaps it was that desperation I could use against them. I looked up at the top of the building where I'd seen the gun barrel. The figure was moving fast, but not fast enough to hide. It was a man, thin, with a scraggly beard and tattered clothes. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like just another survivor, hardened by hunger and thirst. I don't know if it was better or worse than facing a soldier. The tension was rising. Ellen was still silent, protecting her brother. Cornered, I had to decide: face these men head on and risk being shot down, or devise a way to turn their trap against them. Time was running out for us.
The sound of the gunshot still echoed off the buildings as I pressed my forehead against the cold wall, trying to catch my breath. The bucket of water glistened in the center of the square like a cruel temptation, and for a moment I thought perhaps this was my fate: to die in the sand, surrounded by ruins, reaching out for a promise that would never be mine. But then I looked back and saw Ellen protecting Luke, her eyes glued to me. This couldn't be the end. Not yet. I shouted to them, without taking my eyes off the top of the building: "They're just men, not ghosts. If they can hunt us, they can bleed us too." The figure on top of the building ducked too quickly. Another shot shattered a window near me. The dry sound made my ears ring. But now I knew. They weren't so well positioned. They weren't soldiers, just survivors using what little ammunition they had left to terrorize. I needed to turn the game around. I ran to a twisted piece of iron lying on the ground, dragged it to the side, and threw it across the street. The metallic sound echoed as if someone had run away. Immediately, 2 gunshots rang out in the direction of the noise. I smiled, still panting. They're nervous. Ellen, behind the wall, took the advantage of the moment to sneak a little. She whispered loud enough for me to hear, "You're not going in alone." I looked at her and saw her eyes flash, no longer with distrust, but with something resembling defiance. Luke, beside him, already had some rocks in his hands, ready to throw them at strategic points. I couldn't miss. I took a deep breath and thought quickly. If I went to the bucket, I'd become the easy target they were waiting for. But what if I turned the bucket against them? I looked around, assessing. The twisted iron I'd thrown earlier had managed to create a sound. Maybe I could do it again, but this time with more risk. I crouched down and ran to another piece of concrete loose among the rubble. Then slowly I dragged it. Then, with a swift movement, I threw it toward the bucket. The impact sent water spraying, streaming like a blue flame in the sun. The shooters reacted immediately. A shout echoed, hurled orders, footsteps on the concrete above me. It was the moment. "Now, Luke," I shouted. The boy rose from his hiding place for a second and threw 2 well-aimed rocks at the broken window. One hit the frame, the other made one of the men retreat with a curse. Ellen ran to me, knife in hand, the hard look of someone who wouldn't hesitate to use it. "Let's go up," she said, pointing to a rusty ladder on the side of the building. I nodded without thinking. We ran side by side, hearts pounding, as gunshots ricocheted behind us. We climbed the metal steps that creaked beneath our feet, each step seeming to announce our presence. But it didn't matter. Adrenaline was taking over. On the first floor, we found a broken door. We entered the dark space smelling of mold and dust. The echo of voices came from above, closer. They hadn't expected us to follow. Ellen looked at me, her eyes burning with fury and courage. If we die here, at least we didn't wait. He smiled from the corner of his mouth, even in the midst of the chaos. "We're not going to die. Not today." We walked down the narrow corridor. I wielded an iron pipe as a makeshift weapon. Ellen held the knife steady. The sound of footsteps overhead grew louder. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the end of the hallway. A thin, dirty man pointed his gun straight at us. His finger trembled on the trigger.
The moment froze. Without thinking, I threw the iron pipe at him. The impact was brutal, hitting his arm and deflecting the shot. The bullet shattered an old ceiling light. Ellen lunged like a feline, plunging the knife into his shoulder before he could react. The man screamed, dropped the gun, and fell to his knees.
She stared at him, breathing deeply, blood dripping from the blade. For the first time, I saw Ellen as more than just a girl trying to survive. She had become a warrior, shaped by desperation. "Where are the others?" I growled, grabbing the man by the collar. He spat out blood and laughed, a harsh, hollow laugh. Louder. Waiting. "You're all going to die of thirst." Ellen pressed the knife against him, but before she could say anything else, another shot rang out from upstairs. The man's body twitched and fell limp. Silence. We looked at each other, understanding they eliminated their own when they became burdens. The game was crueler than we imagined. I turned my gaze to the stairs leading to the next floor. The tension was so thick it seemed to weigh down our shoulders. Behind us, Luke was still there, exposed, waiting for us to return with the only thing that mattered at that moment: water. I lowered my voice and said to Ellen, "If I go all the way to the end of these steps, I don't know what will happen." She just took a deep breath, gripping the knife tightly. "Then let's find out." The silence after the final blow seemed to engulf everything. The dark corridor was covered in debris, smelling of gunpowder and sweat. The fallen man was breathing heavily, his eyes half closed, as if fighting fainting. When we pulled open the locked door and freed the prisoners, I realized the tragedy here was far greater than I had imagined. These weren't just common looters. They were hunters, yes, but of a different kind. They gambled with the lives of others, capturing innocent people and using them as bargaining chips. Sadistic entertainment. One of the freedmen, thin as a skeleton, raised his sunken eyes toward me. "They are not alone. They are part of something bigger." The voice was weak, but held certainty. "Something bigger?" I asked, trying to remain calm. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I saw one of them talking, not here, but somewhere else when they took me prisoner. They were talking about a man, not like the others. They respect him. They follow orders." "Orders?" Ellen narrowed her eyes. "What kind of orders?" The man coughed up blood, breathing heavily. "He's not one of them. He's different. Cold. Calculating. He has plans. He doesn't act on impulse like those dogs. They called him Levi." My whole body stiffened. The word pierced me like a blade. Levi. Would it be my brother? The world around me seemed to lose sound for a moment. Memories I'd forced myself to keep buried began to surface, threatening to consume me. My childhood, the fights, my father's gaze preferring him to me, the day Sophie was born, and most of all, the day he disappeared. Ellen stared at me, trying to decipher the reaction I was struggling to hide. "Do you know that name?" I didn't answer. Not there, not at that moment. My heart was beating too fast, my breath shallow. Before I could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. Heavy, hurried, like a wave about to crash down on us. The hunters were coming. Lots of them. I gripped the gun I'd taken tightly, counting only 2 bullets in the chamber. Ellen adjusted the knife in her hands, her eyes shining in the darkness. Behind us, the prisoners wept softly, begging for salvation. I looked at the staircase that would lead us to the confrontation and thought of the name that echoed in my mind like poison. Levi. If he really was connected to all of this, if he really was the man behind the orders, then my journey wasn't just to find my daughter. It was also to face my own brother. The wood upstairs cracked, and the first shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. I raised the gun. Ellen raised the knife. and the question burned inside me, suffocating. If my brother is alive, is he the key to finding Sophie, or is he the reason I'll never see her again? She stared at him, breathing deeply, blood dripping from the blade. For the first time, I saw Ellen as more than just a girl trying to survive. She had become a warrior, shaped by desperation. "Where are the others?" I growled, grabbing the man by the collar. He spat out blood and laughed, a harsh, hollow laugh. Louder. "Waiting. You're all going to die of thirst." Ellen pressed the knife against him, but before she could say anything else, another shot rang out from upstairs. The man's body twitched and fell limp. Silence. We looked at each other, understanding. They eliminated their own when they became burdens. The game was crueler than we imagined. I turned my gaze to the stairs leading to the next floor. The tension was so thick, it seemed to weigh down our shoulders. Behind us, Luke was still there, exposed, waiting for us to return with the only thing that mattered at that moment, water. I lowered my voice and said to Ellen, "If I go all the way to the end of these steps, I don't know what will happen." She just took a deep breath, gripping the knife tightly. "Then let's find out." The silence after the final blow seemed to engulf everything. The dark corridor was covered in debris, smelling of gunpowder and sweat. The fallen man was breathing heavily, his eyes half closed, as if fighting fainting. When we pulled open the locked door and freed the prisoners, I realized the tragedy here was far greater than I had imagined. These weren't just common looters. They were hunters, yes, but of a different kind. They gambled with the lives of others, capturing innocent people and using them as bargaining chips, sadistic entertainment. One of the freedmen, thin as a skeleton, raised his sunken eyes toward me. "They are not alone. They are part of something bigger." The voice was weak, but held certainty. "Something bigger?" I asked, trying to remain calm. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I saw one of them talking, not here, but somewhere else when they took me prisoner. They were talking about a man, not like the others. They respect him. They follow orders." "Orders?" Ellen narrowed her eyes. "What kind of orders?" The man coughed up blood, breathing heavily. "He's not one of them. He's different, cold, calculating. He has plans. He doesn't act on impulse like those dogs. They called him Levi." My whole body stiffened. The word pierced me like a blade. Levi. Would it be my brother? The world around me seemed to lose its sound for a moment. Memories I'd forced myself to keep buried began to surface, threatening to consume me. My childhood, the fights, my father's gaze preferring him to me, the day Sophie was born, and most of all, the day he disappeared. Ellen stared at me, trying to decipher the reaction I was struggling to hide. "Do you know that name?" I didn't answer. Not there. Not at that moment. My heart was beating too fast, my breath shallow. Before I could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. Heavy, hurried, like a wave about to crash down upon us. The hunters were coming. Lots of them. I gripped the gun I'd taken tightly, counting only 2 bullets in the chamber. Ellen adjusted the knife in her hands, her eyes shining in the darkness. Behind us, the prisoners wept softly, begging for salvation. I looked at the staircase that would lead us to the confrontation and thought of the name that echoed in my mind like poison. Levi. If he really was connected to all of this, if he really was the man behind the orders, then my journey wasn't just to find my daughter. It was also to face my own brother. The wood upstairs cracked,
and the first shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. I raised the gun, Ellen raised the knife, and the question burned inside me, suffocating. If my brother is alive, is he the key to finding Sophie? Or is he the reason I'll never see her again?